Michael Harrington lived in a world carefully stitched together with charm, precision and lies, so intricate that even those closest to him could not see through them. On the surface, his life looked enviable, almost storybook perfect. He was a polished financial consultant in his mid-30s who knew exactly how to present himself in public. He dressed sharply, carried himself with confidence, and spoke in a calm, assured tone that made others trust him instantly. Clients admired his dedication, neighbors greeted him with warm smiles when he left for work each morning, and his colleagues often praised him for his relentless work ethic. To anyone observing from the outside, he was a man with stability, security, and the kind of life most people wanted. Yet, underneath that polished exterior, Michael was living with a secret so heavy, it grew darker with each passing day. At home in the quiet suburb, Michael was the devoted husband. His wife, Emily, adored him. She believed she had found her true partner in life, someone steady and reliable, someone who listened to her and held her hand when the world felt overwhelming. Their home was modest, but full of warmth, a place decorated with Emily's careful touch. Photographs of vacations, smiling family gatherings, and cozy holiday moments lined the walls, each picture telling the story of a happy marriage. Emily had built her world around the idea that Michael was her anchor, the man who would always stand beside her. She couldn't have imagined that the man she trusted the most was capable of living another existence entirely. For only a short drive away, Michael's other life waited for him in a modern downtown apartment filled with sleek furniture and expensive touches. Here, he was not the settled husband, but the free-spirited bachelor who lived for romance, excitement, and promises of a glittering future. In this world was Vanessa, a woman who believed she had captured his whole heart. To her, Michael was everything she wanted. Successful, affectionate, and always making her feel special with gifts, surprise dinners, and whispered assurances that one day they would marry. Unlike Emily, Vanessa knew nothing of the suburban home or the quiet woman who lived there. She thought Michael belonged only to her, and in his presence, she never questioned the gaps in his stories or the long stretches of time when he disappeared. Michael had perfected his balancing act. Every lie he told was calculated, every excuse carefully crafted. Business trips explained his absences, late-night client meetings excused his delays, and sudden phone calls created the perfect cover to slip away when needed. He learned how to divide his time, rotating weekends between Emily and Vanessa, building walls so high that neither woman could see over them. The deception thrilled him in a way he never admitted even to himself. He felt in control, powerful, as though he was directing two completely separate films in which he played the starring role. Each identity fed his ego and kept him chasing the illusion that he could keep both lives forever. But there were cracks forming, small ones that he tried to ignore. Sometimes he would mix up details, forgetting which story he told to which woman. At times he grew distracted at work, consumed not by spreadsheets, but by the mental gymnastics of ensuring neither life collided with the other. There were close calls, phone calls he barely intercepted before Emily could answer, questions from Vanessa that forced him to invent explanations on the spot, moments of exhaustion when he feared his entire facade would collapse. And yet, every time he escaped unscathed, he convinced himself he could handle the danger. What he didn't realize was that the pressure was slowly tightening around him. Like a rope he had tied himself. Every lie added weight. Every secret created a new risk. His double life was a tower built on a fragile foundation, and though it looked strong from the outside, it was destined to crumble. Somewhere deep down, Michael knew it. He could feel the unease creeping in when Emily smiled at him with pure trust, or when Vanessa spoke about the future with excitement and hope. These moments were reminders of the truth he had buried, that love built on deception can only end in disaster. As the days passed, the mask he wore became heavier. Michael was walking a path that could only lead to one ending, though he tried to ignore it. He thought he was in control, but in reality the web of deceit was tightening around him, waiting for the moment when everything would shatter and the world would see him for what he truly was. Michael's carefully built deception, grew deeper with every passing week, and though he carried himself with the same air of confidence, the cracks beneath the surface were widening. In the quiet safety of his suburban home, Emily continued to live in blissful ignorance. She admired the way her husband seemed so hard-working and ambitious, often telling friends how proud she was of him for dedicating so much to his career. She explained away his late nights at the office, convinced herself his exhaustion was the price of success, and overlooked the subtle signs that something was wrong. She loved him too much to question him, and that blind trust became Michael's greatest weapon. With Vanessa, his world was more passionate and reckless. He slipped into her life with a different kind of energy, showering her with attention and affection in ways that made her feel special. He brought her flowers, took her to high-end restaurants, and promised her dreams of marriage and children. Vanessa believed him wholeheartedly. She thought she had found a man who wanted to build a future with her, someone stable yet exciting. To her he was the perfect partner, and she spoke of him to her friends as if their lives were destined to be forever intertwined. But as Michael stretched himself thinner, the inconsistencies grew harder to hide. Vanessa began to notice things that didn't make sense. There were unexplained absences, calls he ignored in her presence, and vague explanations that seemed too rehearsed. His phone was always turned face down, his stories often shifted, and his excuses started to feel mechanical. The warmth she had once felt when he smiled at her now carried a hint of something strange, a tension she couldn't quite define. She tried to dismiss it, reminding herself of his charm and generosity, but suspicion crept into her thoughts like a shadow she couldn't shake. The turning point came one evening, when Michael abruptly left their dinner, claiming a client emergency. Vanessa, unsettled by the look in his eyes as he rushed out, decided to follow him. She kept her distance, trailing him through the streets, her pulse racing with each step. Eventually, she saw him pull into a suburban driveway. What she witnessed left her frozen. A woman, warm and unsuspecting, greeted him at the door. She embraced him with the ease of someone who had done it countless times before. Vanessa stood across the street, watching in disbelief, as Michael stepped into the house with the comfort of a husband returning home. The shock was overwhelming, and Vanessa's world felt as if it had been torn apart in an instant. The man she thought belonged to her alone was married. Every promise he had whispered to her now felt like poison. Every tender moment a lie designed to keep her quiet and blind. Her anger grew, but she didn't let it spill over immediately. Instead, she began to gather evidence. She took photos, saved text messages, and began piecing together the truth of Michael's double life. Her heartbreak hardened into resolve, and she told herself she would not be the victim of his deception. Michael, however, was not blind to the shift in Vanessa's behavior. He noticed her questions grew sharper, her tone colder, her eyes filled with an intensity that hadn't been there before. He felt the weight of her suspicion pressing against him. Each time she pressed for answers, he brushed her off with excuses, but he knew it was only a matter of time before she uncovered everything. His lies were no longer safe. They were at risk of being torn open and exposed. The walls of his two worlds, once so firmly separated, were beginning to collapse into each other. Emily remained in the dark, blissfully unaware of the storm forming just beyond her doorstep. She trusted her husband, loved him too deeply to see the truth that hovered in plain sight. Vanessa, on the other hand, was preparing to strike. Her anger fueled her determination to reveal Michael for the fraud he was, not just to herself, but to the woman whose life he had entangled with lies. For Michael, every moment became a game of survival. He told himself he could still control the situation, but the unease gnawed at him day and night. He began to see Vanessa not as the woman he once charmed, but as a threat that loomed larger with each passing day. She held the power to unravel everything. The marriage, the career, the carefully curated image of a man admired by his peers. With just one phone call or one confrontation, Michael knew the illusion he had crafted would crumble into dust. The pressure built like a storm waiting to break. Michael tried to move between his two lives, as if nothing had changed, smiling at Emily during dinners, holding Vanessa's hand when they walked together, pretending to be the man each woman believed him to be. But beneath his calm exterior, the fear was growing. He could sense that his secret was on the edge of exposure, and in his heart he knew that once Vanessa decided to act, there would be no turning back. Emily continued to live her life as though nothing had changed, still caught in the warmth of her husband's presence. She decorated their home for the seasons, planned meals, and dreamed about future vacations together. When Michael was at home, she saw only the man she had promised to love for the rest of her life. She noticed small things, receipts for dinners she never attended, faint traces of perfume that didn't belong to her, unexplained business trips that seemed to happen more frequently, but she pushed those suspicions to the side. In her mind, love meant trust, and she clung to the belief that her marriage was built on something real. Her friends sometimes hinted that Michael seemed distant, but Emily brushed their comments away. She believed in him too much to let doubts take root. Vanessa, however, had no illusions left. She knew the truth now. Every time she thought about Michael stepping into that suburban home, every time she remembered seeing him kissed by another woman, her anger boiled. The heartbreak she had once felt was replaced by a burning need to confront him, to expose him for what he was. She told herself she had been humiliated and used, and she would not allow him to continue playing with her life. Quietly she began preparing. She gathered proof, photographs, messages, receipts, anything that painted the picture of his betrayal. She planned not only to confront Michael but to tear apart the double life he had built so carefully. She imagined calling Emily, showing her everything, destroying the web of lies with undeniable evidence. Michael felt the shift in Vanessa long before she acted. Her once adoring gaze was now sharp and suspicious, and her questions cut deeper than before. She wanted details, explanations, and answers he could no longer provide without stumbling. The charm that had once kept her at ease was failing. He could feel her slipping from his control, and with her went the stability of the life he had built. He had always thrived on control, weaving stories and watching them hold together. But now the threads were fraying. At work, he found it difficult to concentrate. He stared at spreadsheets without seeing them, distracted by the constant gnawing thought that his worlds were about to collide. At home, he smiled at Emily across the dinner table, but behind his smile was a storm. Every time she laughed at his jokes or leaned on his shoulder, he thought about how fragile her happiness was. He knew that once she learned the truth, she would never look at him the same way again. The image of her finding out filled him with dread, but it also hardened something inside him. Michael began to see Vanessa, not as the woman he had once courted, but as a danger that had to be managed. Her determination terrified him more than he wanted to admit. In his mind, she was no longer a lover, but a threat to everything he valued. His marriage, his reputation, his career. He imagined what would happen if Emily found out, if his colleagues learned of his deceit, if his carefully built life collapsed under the weight of Vanessa's anger. The thought of it consumed him, and he began to feel trapped. His nights grew restless. He would lie awake, listening to the quiet breathing of his wife beside him, thinking of Vanessa's eyes when she had caught him in lies, the way her voice had sharpened with suspicion. He imagined her calling Emily, imagined the fallout, imagined the walls of his world closing in on him until there was nowhere left to run. The more he thought about it, the more he convinced himself that there was only one way to protect the life he had built. For Vanessa, the time for patience was ending. She rehearsed in her mind how she would expose him. She thought about calling Emily directly, about showing up at his suburban doorstep unannounced, about confronting him with everything she had gathered. She no longer wanted explanations. She wanted revenge, justice for the lies that had stolen months of her life. Every day she waited felt like torture, and she knew soon she would take action. Michael sensed it, and fear twisted into something darker. He told himself he could not let her destroy him. He had lied to protect himself before, and now, in his desperation, he began to justify what he had never thought himself capable of. He convinced himself that if Vanessa followed through with her plan, everything would be over, and that possibility was wager. The pressure he had once thrived on was now suffocating him, and with each passing day, his thoughts took a more dangerous turn. Emily remained completely unaware of the storm building around her. She continued to live in the comfort of her marriage, making plans and dreaming of the future, never realizing how fragile her world truly was. She believed in Michael's love so completely that she could not see how close it all was to breaking, but Michael knew. He knew the tower of lies he had built could not stand much longer, and instead of stepping away, he was already considering a choice that would lead to tragedy. The night that changed everything began with a message from Michael to Vanessa. He told her they needed to talk, that he was ready to be honest at last, and that she should come to his downtown apartment. For Vanessa, it felt like the moment she had been waiting for. She believed he was finally going to admit to his lies, to own up to the double life he had been living. She carried the evidence she had gathered with her, tucked away as if it were armor. Photographs, messages, receipts, proof that he had betrayed her. She wanted to look him in the eye as she tore apart his facade, and she wanted to make sure he could not talk his way out of it this time. Michael, however, had no intention of confessing. For days, he had been haunted by the thought of Vanessa exposing him. Every possible outcome ended with the destruction of his marriage, the collapse of his reputation, and the shame of being revealed as a fraud. His fear had twisted into resolve. He told himself that Vanessa had left him no choice, that she had forced his hand by threatening to destroy everything he had built. His mind, clouded by panic, convinced him that the only way to preserve his world was to eliminate the threat standing before him. When Vanessa arrived, the atmosphere inside the apartment was different from anything she had experienced with him before. Gone was the warmth, the charm, the easy smile that had once captivated her. The air felt heavy, and Michael's expression was cold, almost unreadable. Vanessa began laying out her evidence, placing each piece like a weapon meant to cut him down. She thought she was winning, that she was finally holding him accountable for his betrayal. But to Michael, each piece of proof was a nail in the coffin of the life he was desperate to protect. The tension grew unbearable. Vanessa's voice sharpened with anger, her words fueled by months of betrayal and humiliation. She told him she would not be silent, that she would expose him for what he was. In her mind, she was reclaiming her power, but in Michael's mind, she was tearing his world apart, right in front of him. He could see his wife learning the truth, his colleagues whispering about his downfall, his entire identity crumbling into ruins. It was in that moment that fear gave way to violence. The decision was sudden, a line crossed without hesitation. The struggle erupted quickly, Vanessa fighting with every ounce of strength she had. She tried to resist, to push him away, to escape the trap she had walked into. But Michael's desperation was overwhelming, fueled by the panic that had been building inside him for weeks. To him this was survival, the only way to stop his carefully constructed life from disintegrating. The apartment, once a place of charm and secrecy, became a scene of brutality. Furniture was overturned in the chaos, the silence of the night shattered by the violence that unfolded within those walls. Vanessa's determination, which had carried her this far, could not save her now. Her strength was no match for Michael's resolve, and as the struggle ended, the weight of what he had done pressed down on him with crushing force. When the silence finally returned, it was not peace that filled the apartment, but horror. Michael stood over the aftermath of his decision, his breath ragged, his hands trembling. The reality of what he had done seeped in slowly, a chilling awareness that there was no undoing it. The woman who had once loved him, who had once believed in him, was gone, and the floor of his double life was now stained in blood. For a long time, he didn't move. He stared at the scene as if unable to comprehend the enormity of his actions. The lies he had built for years had led him here, to a single night of irreversible violence. In his twisted reasoning, he had convinced himself this would preserve his world, that removing Vanessa would mean safety. But standing there, he realized too late that he had destroyed far more than the threat she posed. He had crossed into a darkness from which there was no return. Michael tried to think, tried to calculate as he always had, but his thoughts were fragmented. He considered how to hide what had happened, How to make sure no one would know, but the enormity of the act left him paralyzed. Every sound outside the apartment felt like the world closing in. Every flicker of light a reminder that he was trapped in the consequences of his own deceit. The double life he had once controlled so carefully had finally collapsed in the most violent way possible. The lies, the manipulation, the arrogance of thinking he could live two lives at once, had culminated in this moment. He was no longer just a man with secrets. He was now something far darker, and as he sat in the silence of that apartment, staring at what he had done, the only certainty was that the truth he had tried so hard to bury would find its way to the surface. When Vanessa stopped answering calls and messages, her friends grew worried. She was known for her energy and constant presence in their lives, and her sudden silence felt unnatural. At first they thought she might be angry or taking time for herself, but as the days passed, concern turned to alarm. One of her closest friends decided to file a missing person report. The police began an investigation, tracing her last known movements, reviewing her contacts, and searching for any clue that could explain her disappearance. It didn't take long before Michael's name surfaced. He had been a central figure in her life, and investigators quickly discovered he was not the man he appeared to be. Detectives began piecing together the picture. Phone records placed Vanessa near Michael's apartment on the night she was last seen. Surveillance cameras captured her entering the building, but never leaving. Michael claimed he hadn't seen her that night, offering a shaky explanation that he had been working late and then gone straight home. The alibi sounded rehearsed, and when checked against timelines and evidence, it began to fall apart. Small details betrayed him, gaps in his story, inconsistencies in his description of the evening, and the growing realization that he had more to hide than he admitted. The investigation deepened, and soon the image of Michael as a respectable husband and businessman unraveled. Detectives uncovered his double life. They found Vanessa's messages, the promises of a future, the receipts from expensive dinners and gifts, the pattern of lies he had spun to keep both women convinced they were the center of his world. When they confronted Emily with the truth, her world collapsed in an instant. She had built her life around a man she thought she knew, only to discover that her marriage was nothing more than a facade hiding deceit and betrayal. For Emily, the revelation was more than heartbreak. It was a complete dismantling of her reality. She saw the photographs of her husband with another woman, read the messages filled with love and promises, and realized every doubt she had once ignored had been justified. The man she trusted had been living a double life, right in front of her. But worse than the betrayal was the growing evidence that linked him to Vanessa's disappearance. Emily, who had once defended him against even the slightest suspicion, found herself forced to face the possibility that her husband was capable of something unthinkable. As investigators pressed forward, the evidence became overwhelming. Traces of Vanessa were found in Michael's apartment, physical proof that she had been there on the night she vanished. The inconsistencies in his story grew larger, and when combined with the timeline and witness accounts, the image became clear. Michael had not only deceived the women in his life, but had also crossed the line into violence. His arrest was swift, and the news spread quickly. A respected consultant, a seemingly devoted husband, now stood accused of murder. The trial that followed drew intense public attention. The courtroom became a stage where the details of Michael's double life were laid bare. Prosecutors painted him as a manipulative liar, a man who thrived on deceit and control, who, when cornered, chose violence to preserve his image. They revealed Vanessa's evidence, her plans to expose him, and the brutal way her life had ended. They spoke of Emily's devastation, the betrayal that went beyond infidelity to something darker and more dangerous. The jury listened as the facade of Michael Harrington collapsed piece by piece. Michael sat in silence throughout much of the trial, his once confident demeanor replaced with a hollow stare. The charm he had relied on for years was useless here. No story could save him, no carefully crafted lie could undo the truth. The weight of evidence pressed down on him, and with every testimony, the world saw him not as a successful man with a secret, but as a predator who had destroyed lives to protect himself. When the verdict was delivered, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty, The word echoed through the room, sealing his fate. Emily wept quietly, mourning not just the life of Vanessa, but also the life she had believed she shared with her husband. Michael was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars, stripped of the freedom he had once used to juggle his double existence. The story of Michael Harrington became a cautionary tale, whispered about in hushed tones and dissected in documentaries and articles. He had lived a double life of love and deceit, balancing lies with precision, but in the end it all came crashing down in blood. His actions left devastation in their wake. One woman gone, another shattered, and a man who believed he could control everything reduced to nothing more than a prisoner defined by his crime. The walls he had so carefully built had collapsed, and the truth he had fought so desperately to bury had risen to destroy him.